There is a man in the Bible who lost his 10 children, his entire fortune, and his health all in a single day. And the craziest part? God let it happen. Not because this man was evil, not because he made a terrible mistake. God actually called this man the most righteous person on the entire face of the earth. So why did God let all of it get ripped away from him? That question right there is the most important question the entire Bible tries to answer. Not just for this man, for you, for every parent who has buried a child, for every person who has prayed and felt like the ceiling was made of concrete, for every good, honest person who looked up at the sky and said, God, why? The book of Job is the oldest book in the entire Bible. Some scholars think it was written before Moses even picked up a pen, and yet most people either skip it completely or walk away from it more confused than when they started. That is because they miss the most important part. There is a creature at the end of this book, a terrifying sea dragon, that holds the key to the whole thing. And once you understand what that creature means, the entire book of Job clicks into place like a puzzle you have been staring at for years. So let us start at the beginning, because this story has a setup that is unlike anything else in the Bible. His name was Job, and Job was not just comfortable or well off. He was the richest man in the entire ancient Near East. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 teams of oxen, and 500 female donkeys. If you have ever seen sheep farms in the countryside, try to picture that number, 7,000 sheep, then triple it for the camels alone. He also had hundreds of servants and a large, loud, happy family with 10 kids. Job was living a life that most people in the ancient world could not even dream about. But here is the thing that made Job different from every other wealthy man of his time. He was not just rich in stuff. He was rich in character. The Bible goes out of its way to describe him using 4 specific words: blameless, upright, one who feared God, and one who turned away from evil. 4 words that together paint a picture of a man who had genuinely built his life on something real. He was not faking it. He was not performing religion to keep up appearances. He cared so deeply about doing right by God that he would wake up early in the morning and offer sacrifices for each of his 10 children, just in case one of them had a bad thought toward God while they were sleeping. Think about that. He was not just protecting himself. He was covering his whole family even when they did not ask him to. And then, in what feels like a single afternoon, it all collapsed. But before we get to the disaster, we need to talk about a scene that most readers rush past. Because this scene is the entire reason for everything that happens next. And it takes place somewhere Job could not see. It takes place in heaven. The Bible describes a gathering where the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Now, when most of us hear the phrase sons of God, we think of Jesus. But in the Old Testament, this phrase is used to describe a group of spiritual beings, what we would call angels today, who are part of God's heavenly court. Think of it like a king's royal council. These beings serve God, carry out his work, and have roles in watching over the earth. Among them was a figure the original Hebrew text calls Ha-Satan. And this is where things get interesting, because most people read that word and immediately think of the horned red villain they have seen in cartoons. But Ha-Satan in Hebrew is not actually a proper name in this part of the Bible. It is a title. It means the accuser. It is the same word used in the ancient Near East to describe a specific kind of royal official, someone whose entire job was to travel the empire, gather information, and then bring accusations against people who were not being loyal to the king. So when this accusing spirit shows up in God's court, he is doing his job. He has been roaming the earth. He has been watching people. And he has found what he thinks is a very interesting case. He points to Job and basically says, of course Job worships you. Look at everything you have given him. You have put a wall of protection and blessing around him and his whole family. Take all of that away, and I promise you, he will curse you to your face. It is one of the most provocative challenges in all of Scripture. The accuser is not just attacking Job. He is attacking the entire idea that a person can genuinely love God for who God is, rather than just for what God gives them. He is saying that all human devotion is really just a transaction. Give people enough blessings and they will praise anyone. And God, in a move that has confused readers for thousands of years, says, all right, everything he has is in your power. Just do not lay a hand on him. What happens next is brutal, and the Bible does not soften it. In one single day, raiders attacked and stole Job's oxen and donkeys, killing his servants. Lightning struck and burned up all 7,000 sheep along with more servants. A third raiding party swept in and took all 3,000 camels, and then, just as a messenger was reporting the third disaster, a fourth messenger arrived with the worst news of all. A great wind had come from the desert, struck all 4 corners of the house where Job's children were eating together, and the house collapsed. All 10 of them were gone. 4 messengers. 4 disasters. And each one ends with the same line, I alone have escaped to tell you. Job gets the news and does something that should stop us cold. He does not yell, he does not throw things. He tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell to the ground. And then he said this, Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. If you have been through real loss, you know how impossible that response sounds. That is not a man who just barely held himself together. That is a man whose faith was deeper than his pain. And the Bible says that in all of this, Job did not sin or blame God. Round 1 goes to Job. But the accuser is not done. He comes back before God and says, sure, he passed the test when it was just stuff, but touch his body, hurt him for real. He will curse you to your face. And again, God gives permission. This time, Job is struck from head to foot with painful boils. His skin was breaking open. Every movement hurt. He was in constant, unrelenting agony. And now we see just how low a person can go. Job went and sat on the ash heap. In the ancient world, this was the garbage dump outside of town, where people burned their waste and their animal dung. It was the lowest, most humiliating place a person could be. And Job sat there in the ashes, scraping at his sores with a broken piece of pottery. His wife stood over him and said, Do you still hold on to your integrity? Curse God and die. She was broken too. She had lost her children and her wealth and was now watching her husband fall apart. Her words were not evil so much as they were desperate. She had nothing left either. And 3 of Job's closest friends heard what had happened and traveled from their homes to be with him. When they saw him from a distance, they barely recognized him. They tore their robes, threw dust in the air, and sat down next to him on the ground. And for 7 whole days, not one of them said a word. They just sat there with him. Because some pain is so big that silence is the only honest response. That part is actually beautiful. The friends got it right for 7 days. Then Job opened his mouth, and what came out was raw and real and shocking. He did not curse God, but he did curse the day he was born. He asked why he had not died in the womb. He said it would have been better if he had never taken a first breath. And in the middle of that outburst, he said something strange. He mentioned a name, a creature, Leviathan. We will come back to that name, because it is the key to the whole book. But first, Job's friends are about to make everything 1,000 times worse. Hey, before we go any further, if you are the kind of person who wants to go deeper on the parts of the Bible that most people skip over, the confusing parts, the scary parts, the parts that actually change how you see everything else, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week we dig into stories like this one, where the real meaning has been buried under centuries of surface-level reading. You do not want to miss what is coming. Hit that button now and let us keep going. Section 2, 3 friends and the worst comfort in history. Job's 3 friends have names: Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And their words have been studied, debated, and quoted for thousands of years, mostly as examples of what not to say to someone who is suffering. But here is the thing. These 3 men were not fools. They were not cruel. In fact, they represented the best theological thinking of the ancient world. The smartest, most respected answers that humanity had come up with for why bad things happen. Their problem was not that they were dumb. Their problem was that they were wrong. And they were so confident in being wrong that they kept doubling down on it every time Job pushed back. Their core belief was simple, clean, and completely logical on the surface. Good things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. The amount of pain you are going through is directly connected to how much evil you have done. It is basically karma dressed up in religious language. And when they looked at Job, they did not see a man who had lost everything through no fault of his own. They saw a man who had clearly done something terrible, something hidden, something so bad that God had unleashed this level of judgment on him. They just needed Job to admit it. Eliphaz goes first. He starts off gently enough, reminding Job that he has comforted other people in the past. But then he pivots and tells Job a story about a strange dream he had, where a spirit passed by his face in the night and whispered, "Can a mortal be more righteous than God?" He is building up to his real message. Job, you are not as innocent as you think you are. Then he makes the move that every bad comforter makes. He compares Job to a lion, a powerful, terrifying pack of lions who seemed unstoppable, but whose teeth were eventually broken. The young lion dies hungry, the cubs scatter, the mighty become nothing. To us, this sounds like a strange wildlife documentary. But in the ancient Near East, Job knew exactly what this meant. The lion was a symbol of a powerful, dominant household or family. Eliphaz was saying, without saying it directly, that Job's family was brought down because of their wickedness. He was calling the death of Job's 10 children a judgment from God. Job's response to that is one of the most emotionally raw moments in the Bible. He says his friends are like streams in the desert. In winter, when everything is easy and the weather is cool, those streams are full and rushing. But in the summer, when the heat is crushing and a traveler is dying of thirst and needs water most desperately, those streams are bone dry. They disappear the moment you actually need them. That image is something every person who has been through deep loss knows. The people you thought would show up vanished, and the ones who stayed said things that made the pain worse. Bildad goes next. He is a bit more blunt. He compares Job to a reed plant in a marsh. Reeds grow fast and tall when they have water, but cut off their water supply and they wither and die faster than any other plant, before any other crop. And then he says, that is what happens to those who forget God. He is calling Job a hypocrite, someone who looked godly on the outside but was secretly empty on the inside. And then Zophar, the third friend, goes in hardest of all. He basically tells Job that God is actually being merciful by punishing him less than he deserves. He says that Job is full of empty words, that his hidden sin is so obvious that even God can see it, and that he should just confess and repent and then everything will be fine again. The logic on paper is not terrible. If you do wrong, confess it and God will restore you. That is genuinely true in many situations. The problem is that it is not universally true in all situations, and applying that formula to Job was not just unhelpful. It was a direct about the character of God. What makes this section of Job so powerful is not the friends themselves. It is Job's responses. Because Job does not just sit there and take it. He fights back. And his fighting is some of the most emotionally honest writing in all of Scripture. In one breath, Job says he knows God is powerful and wise, and that nothing in the universe is hidden from him. He acknowledges God's greatness with language that sounds almost like worship. And then, in the next breath, he says God is treating him like an enemy, that God has fenced him in and is watching him like a spy, that God is using his power to crush an innocent man just to make a point. Job is not being blasphemous. He is being honest. He is not pretending to feel peace he does not feel. He is not performing the right religious emotions for an audience. He is saying exactly what it feels like to be him right now, in the ashes, with boils on his skin and his dead children in the ground. And here is something the book of Job makes very clear. God does not rebuke him for that. Not once during this whole long back and forth does God strike Job with lightning or tell him to stop talking. He lets Job say it all. Every angry word, every desperate accusation, every cry into the silence. That tells us something important about how God handles honest pain versus performed religion. In between Job's responses, something incredible happens. Job starts to catch glimpses of something. It is like a man walking in a dark room who keeps bumping into furniture, but every once in a while his eyes adjust just enough to make out the shape of something in the corner. Job begins to talk about a redeemer. He says these words, which became one of the most famous lines in the whole book. I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. This is a man in unimaginable pain. He has no idea where God is or why all of this is happening. But somewhere deep inside him, he knows that this is not the end. He knows that there is someone out there, some figure, who will stand up for him and make things right. He does not know the full picture, but he knows enough to hold on. That faith, buried under all the anger and confusion and pain, is one of the most beautiful things in the entire Bible. Meanwhile, the back and forth between Job and his friends drags on through chapter after chapter. Job presses them. He says, look around you. Wicked people prosper all the time. Evil men build huge houses, raise healthy children, live long lives, and die in peace. Your neat little formula does not explain that. The friends double down. Job doubles down. Nobody is moving. And then Job does something that changes the whole dynamic of the book. He stops talking to his friends and starts talking directly to God. He says, I have signed my defense. Let the Almighty answer me. Let my accuser write out his charges in full. Job is done with the middlemen. He is taking God to court. He is demanding a direct answer. And what happens next is something no one expected, including Job. Section 3. The strange man who shows up out of nowhere before God responds. A fourth man enters the conversation. His name is Elihu, and he is weird. He shows up without any introduction. We never find out who his friends are or why he was there, and after he finishes speaking, he disappears and is never mentioned again. Even Bible scholars argue about whether his speech is an inspired part of the book or a later addition. But what Elihu says is actually more interesting than anything Job's three friends said. And the timing of when he says it is very deliberate. Elihu is young. He has been sitting and listening to this whole argument for a long time, and he has been quiet because he thought it was disrespectful for a young man to speak before older men. But now he has heard enough, and he is furious, not in a hot, cruel way like Zophar. He is furious the way someone gets furious when they hear something deeply wrong being said, and they cannot stay silent any longer. He is angry at Job's three friends for one reason. They could not answer Job, and yet they kept condemning him anyway. They had no proof. They had no evidence that Job was secretly wicked. They just had a formula, and when Job did not fit the formula, they decided Job must be lying rather than considering that their formula might be wrong. But Elihu is also angry at Job, and this is the part that makes his speech different. He does not accuse Job of secret sin. He does not repeat the friends' tired arguments. Instead, he zeroes in on one specific problem. Job has been so focused on defending his own innocence that he has started to make God the defendant in his case. Job has shifted from crying out to God to putting God on trial. And in doing that, Elihu says Job has gone too far. Elihu offers something that none of the three friends ever offered, a completely different explanation for why suffering happens to good people. He says that pain and suffering are not always punishment. Sometimes they are preparation. He compares them to chains. Not chains that are meant to destroy a person, but chains that slow them down on purpose, that force them to stop and pay attention and be changed. He uses the image of a person who is sick and wasting away, lying in bed, unable to eat, close to death, who then encounters a messenger from God. This messenger speaks a word to that sick person, and the person hears it and turns back from the edge of the grave. And then God says, "Deliver him from going down into the pit. I have found a ransom." Elihu is describing suffering as a kind of classroom, a painful, unwanted classroom that no one signs up for voluntarily, but a place where something is happening that could not happen any other way. The person who goes through it comes out different, shaped in ways that comfort and ease could never produce. This is a genuinely new idea in the book of Job, and it lands differently than the friends' speeches. But even Elihu does not have the full answer. He is pointing in the right direction. He can see the door, but he does not have the key. Then something happens that cuts his speech short. A massive storm rolls in, not a light rain shower, a violent sky-filling, thunder-cracking storm that makes everyone go silent. The clouds pile up with terrifying speed. Lightning flashes through the darkness. A cold wind whips in from the north. And right in the middle of describing this storm, Elihu trails off because the storm itself has already begun. And then, from the heart of that storm, God speaks. That transition is one of the most dramatic moments in all of literature. God does not whisper. He does not send a calm, reassuring vision. He speaks from a whirlwind, a tornado of wind and noise and power. And the first words he says to Job are, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." Job wanted a trial. He got one. But the one asking the questions is not Job. Section 4. God's answer. And why most people get it wrong, let us be very clear about what God is not doing when he speaks from the storm. He is not telling Job to be quiet and stop complaining. He is not punishing him for his honest words. He is not showing up to prove that he is bigger and stronger, and Job should just deal with it. What God is doing is something far more specific and far more brilliant. He is showing Job that the framework Job has been using to evaluate his situation is too small. Job has been arguing about justice and fairness and why his story does not make sense. And God is about to show him that his story is set inside a universe so enormous, so complex, so full of things that no human mind can hold, that judging any single chapter of it from the inside is like a fish in a tank arguing about the meaning of the ocean. God asked Job a series of questions, and none of them are what Job was expecting. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you direct the bear with its children? Do you know the laws of heaven? Can you take the morning stars and set their places? These are not trick questions. They are not meant to humiliate Job. They are meant to reframe everything. Because Job has been operating with a tiny set of facts about a tiny window of time, and he has been trying to use those facts to evaluate whether the entire universe is being run fairly. God is saying, you do not have enough information to make that call, not because you are stupid, but because you are finite and the universe is not. But here is where most sermons on Job stop. And this is exactly where they should keep going. Because God does not just ask about stars and oceans and mountain foundations. He shifts into something very specific. He starts talking about animals, not just any animals, but wild, untamable, mysterious animals. God asks Job about lions. Do you hunt prey for the lion? Do you fill the stomach of young lions? Have you watched how they crouch and spring and provide for their cubs? God asks about mountain goats. Do you know when they give birth? Have you counted the months of their pregnancy? Do you watch the moment their young ones grow strong and leave them? God asks about wild donkeys who run free across the open wasteland, laughing at the city and refusing to listen to a driver's commands. Then wild oxen, ostriches, who abandon their eggs with what looks like total carelessness and yet survive and thrive in ways no human could plan. Hawks, who soar on thermals and build their nests on cliff faces so high that human feet cannot reach them. Eagles, who scan the earth from heights so great that a battlefield full of dead soldiers looks like a small stain on the earth below. God is making a point with every single one of these. He is saying, all of this exists. All of this is alive and happening right now. The lion is hunting. The mountain goat is giving birth. The eagle is watching its prey from a height you cannot climb. And none of it is happening outside of my awareness. I see every single one of these moments. I hold every single one of these creatures in my hand. Jesus echoed this exact idea when he said to his followers, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father." It sounds small and almost too simple when you first read it. But in the context of Job, it is enormous. God is saying that even the most ordinary, unimportant creature on earth is not invisible to him. So how much more does he see every detail of your story? Job has been crying out, "Does God even see me? Has he forgotten me? Am I invisible?" And God is saying, "I see the sparrow. I see the eagle on the cliff. I count the months the mountain goat carries her young. You are not invisible. You have never been invisible." But that still does not fully answer the question, does it? Even if God sees everything, why does he allow the bad things to happen? And this is where Leviathan comes back. God builds up to it slowly. First, he describes the behemoth. This is a massive, terrifying land creature with a tail like a cedar tree and bones like beams of iron. It lies peacefully in the cool of the Jordan River while the rushing water swirls around it. It is not afraid of anything. No human weapon can take it down. God looks at this animal and says with what almost sounds like pride, "Look at him. He is the first of my works. Only his maker can bring a sword near him." But then comes Leviathan. God devotes more space to Leviathan than to anything else in his entire speech, an entire chapter. And if you pay attention to the way God describes this creature, you realize he is not just talking about a big scary sea monster. He is talking about the embodiment of chaos itself. Leviathan has rows of scales so tight that not even air can pass between them. His chest is hard as stone. His back is like a row of shields. When he rises from the water, lightning flashes from his eyes. Smoke pours from his nostrils, like smoke from a boiling pot over burning reeds. His breath sets coals on fire. Flames shoot from his mouth. Even the mighty are terrified when he lifts himself up. God says, "Can you draw him out with a fishhook? Can you put a rope through his nose? Will he make a covenant with you? Will he speak to you softly and serve you? Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it twice." And then the most important line in the whole speech, "On earth there is not his equal, a creature without fear. He looks on everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride." Now here is what most people miss about Leviathan. In the ancient world, this creature was a shared symbol across many different cultures. In Mesopotamian mythology, in Canaanite texts, in Babylonian poetry, and in other ancient Near Eastern writings, the sea dragon or sea monster was always a symbol of one thing: chaos, the unpredictable, untamable, violent disorder that can break into a person's life without warning and destroy everything they built. Job had already referenced Leviathan himself back at the very beginning of the book when he cursed the day he was born and said he wished that those who were skilled at rousing Leviathan would have awakened that sea monster on the day of his birth to swallow him before he could even breathe. Archaeologists actually found a bowl in the ruins of ancient Nippur, a clay incantation bowl created by Israelites being held in Babylonian captivity. And on this bowl, written as a protective spell, were these words: "I enchant you with the conjuring of the sea and with the spell of Leviathan, the sea dragon." Leviathan was not just a big fish, it was a symbol. Everyone who heard that name in the ancient world knew what it meant. It meant the terror that strikes without warning. It meant the kind of destruction that makes no sense, that follows no rules, that cannot be bargained with or controlled or explained away. And when God points to Leviathan and says, "Can you control this? Can you put a hook through its nose? Can you make it your servant? Can you tame the chaos?" He is answering Job's deepest question. Job's question was never really, why did the specific bad things happen? Job's deeper question was, is the universe under control? Is there someone truly in charge of the chaos? Because if no one is in charge of the chaos, then it will never stop. And there will never be justice. And the suffering will never be made right. And God's answer is yes. I am the one who looks the Leviathan in the eye. I am the one who sets its borders. I am the one who says to the chaos, "This far and no further." I am the one who holds the keys to the universe, including the parts that terrify you most. The chaos did not come because God forgot about Job. The chaos happened inside a world that God still holds in his hands, watching every sparrow that falls, counting every month of every mountain goat's pregnancy, seeing every boil on Job's skin, hearing every word Job cried into the silence. Job does not fully understand how this works. He is not given a map or a schedule or an explanation that makes the loss of his 10 children feel resolved. He does not walk away with a clear answer to the why question. What he walks away with is something bigger than an answer. He walks away with an encounter. He has come face to face with the God who made the Leviathan and holds it on a leash. And after that encounter, Job says words that are short but absolutely enormous. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes have seen you. This is the turning point of the whole book. Not the restoration of Job's wealth, not the healing of his body, not even God's rebuke of the 3 friends. The turning point is this: Job has stopped arguing about God and has started experiencing God. Section 5. The ending most people miss. And why it changes everything after God finishes speaking from the storm. Something happens that absolutely shocks Job's 3 friends. God turns to Eliphaz, the oldest and perhaps the most respected of the 3, and says, "My anger burns against you and against your 2 friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right as my servant Job has." Read that again slowly. God said that Job, the man who accused God of mocking the innocent, the man who said God was treating him like an enemy, the man who demanded God come and answer for his behavior, spoke more truly about God than the 3 friends who defended God at every turn. How is that possible? How did the angry, grief-soaked, sometimes almost blasphemous words of Job come closer to the truth than the carefully reasoned, theological arguments of his friends? Because Job was honest. He said what was real. He did not put on a performance of faith that he did not feel. He did not wrap up God's ways in tidy formulas that made them easier to explain. He engaged with God directly, painfully, vulnerably, and honestly. And God, it turns out, values that kind of raw honesty over polished religious speech that sounds right but comes from the wrong place. The 3 friends, on the other hand, were so invested in their formula that they were willing to lie about Job's character to protect it. They knew Job. They had been his friends for years, and somewhere in their hearts they knew the accusations they were making did not fully add up. But the formula was safe, the formula was respectable, and the formula did not require them to sit with the terrifying discomfort of not having an answer. God rejected their approach entirely. He told them to go to Job, offer 7 bulls and 7 rams as a burnt offering, and ask Job to pray for them, the man who had been on the ash heap, the man covered in boils, the man who had just been through the worst experience of anyone's life. God told the friends to go ask him for prayer, and Job prayed for them. In the middle of his own unresolved pain, while his 10 children were still dead and his skin was still raw, Job prayed for the men who had said terrible things to him, and God accepted his prayer, and then the restoration began. God gave Job back twice what he had lost: 14,000 sheep instead of 7,000, 6,000 camels instead of 3,000, 1,000 teams of oxen instead of 500, 1,000 female donkeys instead of 500. He also had 7 more sons and 3 more daughters, and his daughters were known across the whole land as the most beautiful women anywhere. Job lived another 140 years, long enough to see 4 generations of his descendants. Now here is where people often get confused about the ending. They ask, does this mean that if you are faithful through suffering, God will give you your stuff back doubled? Is this a promise of material reward for patient endurance? That is the wrong lesson entirely. Job's restoration is not a formula. It is not a guarantee. It is not a template that you can apply to your own situation and expect the same result. The book of Job is actually specifically arguing against that kind of thinking. That is exactly what the 3 friends believed, and God called it wrong. Job's restoration is a picture. It is showing us that the chaos does not win in the end. The Leviathan does not have the final word. The suffering is real, and it is not minimized or explained away, but it is not permanent. It does not define the whole story, and the God who allowed it is also the God who ends it. But there is someone else in the Bible whose story mirrors Job's almost exactly. Someone who also came under attack from the accuser. Someone who also lost everything, was stripped of all comfort, was abandoned by his friends at the worst possible moment, and suffered in ways that should have destroyed anyone who went through them. Someone who also had his character questioned and his motives doubted. The Bible calls him a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Isaiah wrote about him hundreds of years before he arrived, describing someone who would be wounded for the mistakes of others, crushed for wrongs he did not commit, who would carry a weight of pain that was not his to carry. Jesus of Nazareth. And here is where the book of Job connects to the whole arc of the Bible in a way that makes everything click. The God who spoke from the storm, who described the behemoth and the leviathan and the eagle on the cliff, who said he sees every sparrow that falls, who holds the chaos on a leash, that God put on human skin and walked into the chaos himself. He did not watch the suffering from a safe distance. He entered it. He sat in the ashes with Job. He became a man of sorrows. He was betrayed by his friends, mocked by his enemies, accused falsely, stripped of everything, and nailed to a cross to die in agony. And if you ask the question that the book of Job is really asking, if God is good, why does he allow suffering? You cannot fully answer that question without standing at the cross. Because the cross is God's answer to the question of whether he understands what it feels like. It is his answer to the question of whether he is willing to enter the chaos, rather than just manage it from above. Through the cross, Jesus defeated the power of death itself. He walked into the deepest, darkest place in the human experience and walked out the other side. And because he did that, everyone who puts their trust in him has access to a future where there is no more crying, no more pain, no more ash heap, no more Leviathan. A future where every question will be answered, every injustice will be made right, and every tear will be wiped away. Job did not have access to that full picture. He lived before the cross, and yet he still said, "I know that my Redeemer lives." He saw the door even though he could not open it. We live on the other side of that door. We have the full story. And the full story says that the suffering you are going through right now is not evidence that God has abandoned you. It is not proof that you are being punished for something you did. It does not mean the universe is out of control. It means you are living in a world where Leviathan is real, where the chaos is real, where pain is real, and where a God who sees every sparrow and holds the sea monster on a leash is also present in the middle of your worst moment. That is not a comfortable answer. It does not make the pain stop. It does not explain why your specific story went the way it did. But it is a real answer. It is an answer that does not flinch from the actual horror of suffering. And it is an answer that gives us something to hold on to when everything else falls apart. Job held on, and in the end, he saw God. Outro, that is the book of Job. Not a neat little story about patience and rewards. A brutal, honest, deep, and ultimately breathtaking answer to the hardest question a human being can ask. If this video made you think, made you question something, or helped you see this book in a new way, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find this content. And if you want to keep going deeper into the parts of the Bible that most people skip over or misunderstand, subscribe and hit the bell. Every week we go deeper. Here is my question for you. Have you ever gone through a season where you felt like God had forgotten you? What helped you hold on? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to keep going, check out the video on the most terrifying chapter in the book of Revelation that almost no one talks about. I promise it will change the way you read the entire New Testament.